Welcome to the Denton Vibe with Diva Girl Ellie, powered in part by Classic of Denton. The views and opinions expressed by the show hosts and their guests are those of the show host and guests, and not necessarily those of the sponsors, DentonRadio.com, or the Denton Convention and Visitors Bureau. For more information, visit the Policies and Procedures page at DentonRadio.com.
Evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here on the Denton Vibe with Diva Girl Ellie here on Denton Radio for part 2. Thanks for coming back if you were hanging out with us with Mindy Arndt for the She-Rock episode. And right now we have Genevieve West. She is an editor, and we're going to be talking about a whole process that she went through to edit the book that we have here, which it's a long title, Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick. So we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about a little bit about the author. We're going to talk about the stories that are in here. We're going to talk about her process. Thank you so much for joining us, Genevieve.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Of course, of course. So first and foremost, we always like to introduce everyone. Obviously, you live in Denton County, so we're going to classify you as a Dentonite. We're going to classify her as a Dentonite. Denton County, we like to collect people, so we love the more the merrier. So definitely we want to know who you are as a person, and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with the Denton community.
Well, like a lot of people in the area, I am a Denton transplant.
Mm-hmm.
I came here from Michigan.
Nice.
I grew up in Mississippi, went to Florida to do graduate work, went back to Mississippi, went to Michigan and taught for a while, and then came to Denton, I guess, almost 11 years ago.
Wow, okay.
I came to serve as department chair for the English department at Texas Women's University.
Very cool.
We're actually English speech and foreign languages.
Oh, nice.
So I'm the department chair, and came here and have settled and started to put down some roots, and kind of feel like the TWU community, especially, like, those are my people. Like, I found my people.
Your tribe. That's your tribe.
My tribe, absolutely. They're my family for sure.
That's awesome. And a lot of people, it's funny, we have a lot of Northerners that end up coming down here and they just fall in love with the community and they don't want to leave for whatever reason. It's because we're lovable people. Hey,
yes.
I came to Denton, what is it now, 15 years ago, and I haven't left. I'm here, going to stay here for a while, and you just fall in love with the community. And obviously with your involvement in TWU, you kind of get involved just by habit, because you're there. You're in the Denton community, teaching the Denton community.
Absolutely.
And you're involved just by default. So what is it that so you do you chair the whole... I'm
the department chair. I teach not as much as I would like to, but I do teach American, African American, and women's literature.
Nice.
So I'm a professor of English.
I was just going to say...
The official title.
Professor of English. Now, English was always my favorite subject. Hello, I do speak English. My brain does not, however. No, but English was always my favorite subject, and I absolutely loved it. I just wanted to hear all the stories that I could possibly hear. Probably why it fed me so much passion for writing and poetry and whatnot. We were speaking a little bit about Langston Hughes and his poetry, and how I learned that in elementary school. And I, to this day, remember that was the first poems that I can remember as a child being taught.
And I'm impressed that you can still recite part of it.
It's just one of those things. I remember my teacher, her name was Miss Williams. She has passed on, but Miss Williams was the one that taught me that poem piece. And so those things stay with you when you're really passionate about something or something interests you. And so we're going to talk about your passion tonight. So
yes.
So you're obviously teaching English, and now we're sitting here with Zora Neale Hurston's book, and you are the editor for this book.
Yes.
So how did that happen? How do you get to the point where just, tell us the process.
It goes way back. I wrote my dissertation on Zora Neale Hurston and graduated with a PhD in 97. So I've been working on Hurston for a very long time.
Nice.
But it was in the process of working on the dissertation, I was actually looking for something else and came across a handful of short stories by Hurston that were uncited in the scholarship. They had kind of been lost to time and history.
Wow.
And at the time, they weren't like essential for the dissertation. And as some of my colleagues say, the best dissertation is a done dissertation. So in that spirit, it was focused on getting done.
Yes.
And then when the revision of the dissertation came out in book form, I cited those stories for the first time. And that, like those initial citations were really kind of the beginning of a rather lengthy and convoluted process that has led to my being able to edit this volume.
Wow. So it's been a journey for you.
It has. It was a dream project for me as a graduate student. By the time I started working on Hurston in the mid-90s, Hurston had kind of moved from... In the 20s, she was very much an up-and-comer, and she was a major kind of force in the 30s. And then by the time she died in 1960, all of her books were out of print.
Wow.
So you couldn't buy a book by Hurston if you wanted one. And recovery efforts began somewhat after that, and Alice Walker played a very key role in that. But by the mid-90s, you were starting to be able to buy her books again. But her short stories had not been collected. Her letters had not been collected. Her essays had not been collected. And those are the kinds of things that you expect for a major American literary figure. But it hadn't happened. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool one day if I could get to do?
Wow.
And so here I am, all these years later.
That is amazing.
The dream never fully died, and I've finally gotten to do one of those dream projects.
Okay, I have to say that really, truly is just an amazing story. Here I go saying amazing again, part 2 of amazing. So, I mean, you're sitting here, you're basically literally putting out your destiny, kind of. You're studying and doing this, and you're doing your dissertation, and all of a sudden this lands. I mean, it is a dream job. It is a dream.
It is a dream job.
Project. It's how you know life has come full circle for you. You know,
I feel very fortunate, very blessed to have that opportunity. You asked me earlier, we were talking before the show about how do you get to do this, and I mean, part of it is just sheer luck that I found those stories before anybody else found them. Part of it is that I have spent a lot of time working on Hurston over the years, so establishing that professional reputation and the credibility and the authority to do those things. And then part of it was just commitment to the project, because we started talking with the Zora Neale Hurston Trust in 2009 about this project. So it's been, even once I was in conversation with the trust, it was a long time coming. But just being persistent.
And it's a process, and it's not just that, but I mean, it's a very delicate matter to be able to go into the archives of someone and to be literally handed all of this in basic treasure,
It really is. And it's one of the things that I first fell in love with was archival research. And so by the time this project actually became a possible reality, I had collected most of what I already needed.
Wow.
So, as I moved from Florida to Mississippi to Michigan and to Texas, I carried around these plastic boxes full of printouts, Xerox copies of things that I thought, well, maybe one day I'll need this. One day I'll need this. And I finally did need it.
And you just went into your treasure boxes. At that point, those plastic boxes meant a whole new different thing to you.
Yes.
That is so crazy. And I say that sincerely because it is just like everything fell into place for you. Now, I do want to talk about a little bit about, this is her collection, and it says Remarkable Harlem Renaissance Stories. Give us a little taste of what someone can expect by reading this.
So the stories they run from 1921 to 1934, and you actually, one of the things that makes this volume a little bit unique is that there are 9 stories in this volume that are not in a volume that we now know has an ironic title. It's called The Complete Stories of Zora Neale Hurston. It's not complete. It's missing those 9 stories.
And they're in here.
So the 9 stories are here. And I've edited them differently than The Complete Stories was edited. So Hurston, as an early writer in 1921, was trying to figure out how to capture for the eye on the page what the ear hears in speech.
Wow.
And so thinking about things like punctuation and contractions and spelling and, just how do you get the ear to hear
the inflection and the dynamics.
How do you hear the rhythm of the speech? How do you capture that for a reader? When what you're trying to convey is the spoken word.
Definitely. And it's a very, very, I want to say like a very fine line of a nuance that you have to capture, because the way you read it may not be the dynamic that the person is delivering it in.
Yes. And so when they edited the complete stories in 95, they imposed a single standard across the entire volume. Everything from 1921, that first story, to her last story, which was published in the 40s.
Wow.
And what happens when you do that, I realized, is you erase the evolution of her writing over time.
And you kind of box it in there.
You do. So you impose this kind of standardization when Hurston was herself experimenting and evolving over time. So what you get to see in this volume is how she becomes a masterful writer. You get to see her develop and grow and evolve as a writer. And so I think for a lot of people that will be an interesting thing to see. It also has 9 urban short stories in it. And Hurston is largely known as a writer of rural fiction, so fiction about Florida. Her masterpiece is Their Eyes Were Watching God, and it shows up in a lot of high school English classrooms and college classrooms. And people tend to associate her writing with the rural South. But in recovering these stories, we now know that almost a third of her short fiction was set in New York.
Which is a whole other backdrop of life.
It's a different world.
Definitely.
It's a completely different world. So in these stories, you get to see the stories about the rural South, but you also get to see her writing about Harlem in the 20s.
Yeah, and that is just an amazing backdrop for any kind of writing.
And a lot of the stories are funny. We don't necessarily think about Hurston as a humorous writer, but a lot of what she does in these stories is really funny. We get to see her play with language and just really have fun with it in a way that you might not have seen in other places.
Man, that is so spectacular. I just can't even imagine how giddy you were having this happen to you, and the whole process of being able to shed light on all of that. Because, I mean, when you think about it, putting a standard set on writing and whatnot, it's really just doing it a disservice, I think, because there's growth and life happens to each and every one of us. And as writers, as poets, we write from life experiences and we write from failure to triumph, and the growth that happens to us as a human also happens in our writing process.
It does.
So,
you're writing to and from a specific moment, both for you as an individual, but also for your zeitgeist, right? Your cultural moment.
Yeah, definitely. And you cannot deny that is definitely where it leaves its mark. You definitely leave a mark when you do that. So I'm just in awe. I really, truly am. I'm like, this is so amazing. And it is such a neat experience for you. I know you have some stuff tagged in the book, and I wanted to see if we could dig into some of your favorite pink tags.
Okay, let's see. And I will probably have to put my glasses on to see this well enough to read. You can definitely do that.
I would have to do that too.
Okay. So one of my favorite things about some of these stories is the way, I was talking about the way she plays with language. So some of these stories are actually written in what we call a mock biblical form. So they instead of having paragraphs, they have chapters like books of the Bible. And in those books of the Bible, you will find a lot of biblical diction. So instead of saying you and yours, it's thou and thine. But the kind of elevated, archaic biblical diction is mixed with a lot of colloquialisms.
I was just going to ask if it was mixed in with her local language, basically, of that time.
Yes, absolutely. So let me see if I can find a good passage here. So this is She-Rock, and it is
Nice.
It's a story that actually exists in 4 different versions in the body of Hurston's work. She talks about this character, Aunt Caroline, in her autobiography, which is the only reason that we can kind of imagine that Caroline really did exist as a human being, right? She's not just a fictional figure.
Okay.
But Caroline was apparently her aunt, and in each version of the story, Caroline and her husband have a long history, and he steps out with a girlfriend, and she allows this extramarital relationship to extend just so far. And when she decides it's gone far enough, which is typically when he buys the other woman an expensive gift, she intervenes. And she does so with a rather unconventional weapon, which is an axe.
Oh, man.
So, yes, she takes her axe, and in each version that is complete, she goes to the other woman's house, breaks in the door, and leaves not only with the gift that her husband has given, but her husband's pants, which she hangs from the axe handle and then parades past the other men in the community.
Oh my gosh.
So it's a heavily laden story with double entendre.
Yes.
But also it's very much about power in marriage and relationships between men and women. And so this version of the story, She-Rock, is actually the last version, the latest of the 4 versions. It's one of the 2 set in Harlem. And let's see.
Interesting title.
Yeah, She-Rock.
Yeah.
And the husband in the story talks about Caroline as made of rock, of stone, because she cannot be beaten into submission.
Wow.
That for every lick he gives, she gives as good as she gets.
Wow.
So every physical fight ends in a draw. And they migrate to New York, and his friends tell him, oh, Harlem is so big, she'll never know what you're doing. Just go do your thing. And so they tell him to, quote, put off thy ways of Sanford, Florida, and hearken unto Harlem. And he hearkened. And so then she starts to riff on a story or a song by Ethel Waters, who was a blues singer. And the lines go, and in those days came the voice of the prophetess Ethel Waters, who prophesied in Harlem and in Philadelphia and in diverse other cities, crying, Hear, O ye sons and daughters of Ham and Hagar, shake that thing, which is the title of the song, Shake That Thing. Yea, verily, I grow sick and wearing of advising you to shake that thing. How long must I yet say, Up, the hour is upon you, shake that thing. Yea, behold, it is shaken in Georgia, and shivered exceedingly in Memphis. Yet hath Uncle John, who is full of years and reigneth over Jelly Roll, hath he a hump in his back, and occasioned by exceeding great numbers of shakings, go thou and do likewise. So she's playing with this. These are like paraphrases of the Ethel Waters song from 1925, which is, it's the title of the song is Shake That Thing, and she talks about shaking it in Georgia and the old people teaching it to the young people. So when you start to kind of read and see what she's doing with it, she's having a really good time.
She's having fun writing this story.
She absolutely did. So that's one of the examples of the kind of biblical thing that she is up to.
She sure did weave it in there. You can tell, obviously.
There's another one that is unlike anything else in the entire body of Hurston's work.
Okay.
It is about middle-class Harlemites, which typically she's writing about folk characters, people that we would consider more blue-collar workers today, or even gamblers and prostitutes. So not upper middle class characters for sure. And this is the one story in her entire body of work that deals with those. And it's about a woman who has lied about her age and put off marriage because she feels like getting married will age her. And she's clearly not marrying for love, but for convention. And so it's set in Harlem. And the narrator tells us West 139th Street at 10 p.m. Rich fur wraps tripping up the steps of the well-furnished home in the 200 block. Sedans, coaches, coupes, roadsters. Inside, fine gowns and tuxedos, marcel waves and glitter. People who seemed to belong to every race on earth. Harlem's upper class had gathered there her beauty and chivalry.
Nice.
It's not the folk characters that we associate with Hurston. So it's really interesting to see what she does with this plot, this location, these kinds of characters.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. It's almost like she glamorized them.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so.
So if you were to describe her, Zora Neale Hurston, to someone that has never heard of her before, in all of your studies and research and your collecting, how would you describe her to the world?
So there's the biographical snippet, which says so much and yet says so little, which is that between 1920 and 1960, she was the most prolific Black woman writer in America. So that in itself, I think, is really meaningful. She was incredibly well educated for a woman, especially a woman of her time. To think that she was born in a small town in Alabama, grew up in Florida. She graduated from Barnard College, which was then the women's division of Columbia University.
Wow.
She studied anthropology with Franz Boas, who's considered the father of American anthropology, and really worked through their entire life to try to make a living as a writer at a time when it was extraordinarily difficult to do so.
As a woman, yeah.
Especially
definitely.
as a Black woman.
I was just going to say, even race was an issue back then.
Very much so.
So, I'm just like, now I want to go dig up everything I can find on her. I'm going to get this book because it has piqued my curiosity, and I want to hear her stories in those times. Just as you were reading right now, it just really pulled me in.
The press is working on an audiobook version.
Nice.
That I hope will be out soon. Because I think, especially given that some of the Southern stories, even the Northern ones to an extent, are written in dialect, that sometimes people just struggle to figure out what is that word on the page. They can't hear it. And that's the key to reading dialect, is you have to be able to hear it. So I think when it comes out on audio,
it'll help.
And people can hear the stories and hear the voices, I think it will find an entirely new audience.
I think so too, because you're right. I know a lot of times when I'm reading, I obviously love to read, and when I read in Spanish, there's a lot of words that I honestly, and I speak fluent, and I read and write fluently, but there are words that I'm like, okay, this I've never heard before. So I always have to keep a little notepad so I can understand what it means, because there's just so many things that you can learn in a book, obviously. So how did you pick her for your life journey of your career?
Sometimes I think I didn't pick Zora so much as she picked me.
Yeah.
I went to graduate school thinking that I was going to focus on Southern literature. And I knew that I was interested in the 20s, 30s, and 40s in American literature. And we call it that interwar period. So between World War I and World War II, really. And so I knew that. I knew I was interested in women. I knew I was interested in like the history of the South and those intersections of race and class and gender. And then I took a course where I read her autobiography. And in reading the autobiography, I came across reference to Richard Wright's review of her masterpiece, Their Eyes Were Watching God. I had read the masterpiece in college as an undergraduate, thought it was a beautiful book. And then I read Richard Wright's review of it. And he was a contemporary of Hurston's. And he's best known probably for Native Son and Black Boy. But he did not care for Their Eyes Were Watching God. And he actually accused Hurston of minstrelsy and said the book carried no theme, no purpose, no message.
That's pretty strong.
It's a pretty hefty condemnation. And on the other hand, Alice Walker has said there is no book that is more important to her than Their Eyes Were Watching God. So here I am, brand new PhD student, and I'm reading this review, and I'm trying to make sense of there are three voices in my head, and I'm mine, Alice Walker's, and Richard Wright's, and I'm trying to make sense of the triangulation and how did we all read the same book
and get three different versions of it.
Very different versions of it. And so my attempt to understand how people had reached those kinds of conclusions about Hurston in the 30s really became the basis for my dissertation. It was my search for understanding, my curiosity about, how does this happen? How does canon formation happen? How does somebody who is today, this canonical figure, and you can buy her books in any store in America, how does she die in 1960 and be buried in an unmarked grave in a segregated cemetery? How does that happen? And so that was really the beginning for me, was trying to understand that and really coming to appreciate who Hurston was as a person and how remarkable she was. Now, she was complex and complicated and often contradictory, like all of us in our rich humanity are, but tenacious and persistent and willing to walk her own path, even when it was not expedient or popular.
Nice.
And I really, just as a person, I really admire that about her character and who she was.
That is just wow. I can't even say anything else because, I mean, kind of in light of our, Women's Month, celebrating women, that's just, and I hate to say this, but it's an amazing story. It really, truly is. You guys, if y'all want to read something and see the mark that she left on the world, and obviously the involvement that Genevieve has had in this, and I mean, your story with her is truly amazing. It really is.
Thank you. I mean, I tell my graduate students, and I gave a talk on the book just recently at the library, and I said, for all you grad students who are sitting here today, I want you to realize that the journey for me to this book began in graduate school.
Wow.
Go dream big, then make a plan and find a mentor. And don't let go. Life will take you in lots of different directions. When I started working on Hurston, I could never have imagined I would be a department chair. But that's where life took me. I just took my dream with me.
That's awesome. I really like that saying. I really do. And on that note, I mean, my goodness, what else do we need to add to? I could talk more and more. And I definitely, you guys, if y'all haven't seen this is going to be what it looks like. And it's Zora Neale Hurston hitting a straight lick with a crooked stick. Yes. You guys have to check it out.
And that's a young Zora on the back. I'm going to guess that's like maybe 1921, 1925, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting era. So you guys check it out. Genevieve, thank you so much for coming on the Denton Vibe with us tonight.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm happy to do it.
Man, okay. Well, you left me with a lot of stuff to think about tonight. And you guys make sure you check that. Where can you find this online?
Pretty much anywhere.
Okay, so you guys know the title. And would you like to connect anybody with you on your personal Facebook page, or is it just find you on Instagram, or where can people find you?
I am on Facebook, and you can also find me on the TWU website and the English Speech and Foreign Languages page.
All right. Well, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence tonight and
I'm
sharing
happy to do it.
This story. It was just spectacular. So thank you guys for joining us. Don't forget, March 8th is the Revamp Sunday at we're going to have it at Armadillo L Works. If you don't know what that is, look it up, the Revamp. Shout out to all of you Revamp ambassadors, and we will see you next week on the Denton Vibe with Diva Girl Ellie. Thank you.
Well, thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the show. We want to thank our partners and sponsors who made this show possible. And now stick around for a word from all of us here at Discover Denton. Do you love live music? If so, make Denton, Texas your next vacation. Find more information at discoverdenton.com.